publications and more than 10 oral presentations with a few chapters in books as well. So for the session, please.
Good morning, friends. I am Dr. R.K. Yadav, nephrologist from Maine, and this is our team, including doctors, technicians, and nursing staff. To run an effective dialysis unit, we need doctors, technicians, staffs, and all things. So, to run a successful hemodialysis unit, we need 4 systems. One is the tubing, second is the machine, dialysis machine, third is the dialysate, and fourth is the RO system. So this is our unit and our machine, and this is the on point. So now machine is on. There are alarm system in the machine. Alarm systems are 4 types. One is the visual, second is the sound, third is the visual and sound, and 4 is the shutdown of the system. So there are multiple parameters in the dialysis unit, and this is the control screen. This is the blood pump, and here we fit dialyzer and dialyzer. Roko usko.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be discussing about dialysis and dialysis machines. So as you can see here, this is the dialysis machine that we use. So we have multiple alarms here and detectors here. The first is air detector, then you have the arterial pressure, then you have the venous pressure, and the transluminal pressure, and the blood leak. And then you have the conductivity. So I will come to this in detail later. So first, basic part of dialysis machine. So you have the dialysis the machine has a screen where we see the settings. Then after that is the blood pump. This is the air detector, and over here is the place where we keep the dialyzer. And as you can see down, that is the part B, part A fluid, and then the part A fluid. Part B is the base and part A is acid. And these two, before starting, are mixed, and then we start the dialysis. So now the part. So basically, as you can see, this is the dialyzer tubings. The dialyzer tubings. Okay, as you can see here, and this is the dialyzer that we use. Now, coming to the alarms, they can be either visual, can be sound, visual, sound, and shutdown. So there are 4 types of alarm systems. So now we'll be starting off the dialysis machine. So as you can see, we have switched on the machine. Now we are putting the part A and the part B solution respectively. I will wait for the machine to start. So as we will put the test. So we have 16 steps, as you can see. Each of them will be checked accordingly, and then the machine will start. Now coming to the back side of the machine, as we can see here, this red, as we can see, that is the RO system. And just behind this there is the diasafe. The blue is the diasafe filter. Now this filter checks for the ROs for any impurities, if it is present or not. So now we will come to the individual pressure system. So first is the arterial pressure. So the arterial pressure detects the pressure that is between the blood that is coming from the patient into the dialyzer. So normally it is in a negative value, so -80 to 200, that is a normal range. And apart from that, arterial pressure, there are certain conditions in which arterial pressure might increase. For example, either improperly positioned needle or hyperventilation. These are certain conditions in which the arterial pressure might increase. So if the arterial pressure increases, then we might have to adjust the needling or to see for any condition that is predisposing to it. The second alarm, as you can see here, this is the venous pressure alarm. The venous pressure, again, it detects the pressure that is between the dialysate and the blood that is going inside into the patient. Now, normally, if there is any thrombosis in the fistula or in the any access problem is there or any kinks in the line, then the venous pressure can increase and it can give a venous pressure alarm. And thirdly, you have the transmembrane pressure. Now that is the pressure that is between the blood that is coming from the patient and the dialyzer. So based on that, if the transmembrane pressure is high, then again there might be some abnormality either in the filter. There can be a filter disruption can be there. So we might have to change the filter. So these are just the basics of the various pumps, the monitors that are present. Now, lastly, we are coming to conductivity. Now, conductivity is basically the electrical conductivity of the dialysate. So, based on this, we have to mainly the sodium concentration is assessed by the conductivity. If there is hyponatremia, we have to adjust the conductivity accordingly, and then based on that, we can start the dialysis. Also, there is another alarm, that is the blood leak alarm. Now, blood leak alarm occurs when there is either the blood is leaking into the tubes or else there is a dialysis membrane rupture. So, in this case, what we have to do is that we have to use test strips and then we have to detect the blood by using those particular strips. So now, as you can see, this is almost about to get over the testing. So now this dialysis machine, it can be either be used for intermittent hemodialysis or SLED. Now SLED is sustained low efficiency dialysis. So the main difference is that SLED is used for hypotensive patients, critically ill patients who have very low BP or cannot tolerate normal dialysis. The blood pump speed for both differs. For example, for hemodialysis is between 300 to 500, and for SLED we keep half of that. Same for the dialysis flow. Normal dialysis flow is between 600 to 800 for hemodialysis, and it's between 300 to 400 for SLED. SLED we generally prolong it, we keep it for 8 to 10 hours, while intermittent dialysis is for 3 to 4 hours, and which sums up to about thrice per week dialysis, 12 hours per week. And regarding SLED, we can do it daily based on the indication of the particular patient. Machine has been connected. So we have various the screen, as you can see here. So this is the ultrafiltrate volume, that how much volume you want to keep, then how much time is left for ultrafiltration, ultrafiltrate rate. Now after this, now as you can see, the whole circuit has been connected. So this is the blood pump, and this is the dialyzer. Now as you can see, this red tubing, that is the arterial tubing. That is the patient's blood will come from this tubing into the dialyzer, and this is the blue tubing. Then after the dialysis, the blood will be returned to the patient via this blue tubing. So following which, this is the air the air detector, and that is the arterial chamber where you can see the arterial blood collects. So now after this, we have to start the dialysis. So before that, we just have to open this chamber over here, and we will reverse this. And then we will be connecting over here. And similarly, we will be connecting the tubing over here. So now and then we'll close the chamber. So the mechanism is that the blood will be going down from up and the dialysis will going from below, bottom to up. So it's a countercurrent mechanism. The circuit is getting primed. First. Yeah, so and this is the ultrafiltrate menu. So over here we have to set the ultrafiltrate goal. How much amount of fluid we want to return, how much fluid we want to take out from the patient, and then you have the time left, and then you have the ultrafiltrate rate. As you can see here, we already connected the patient. So now this patient already has ongoing dialysis. So as you can see here, now this is the arterial pressure, which is normal. Which also is same, and the TMP is also like normal. There is no alarms. Conductivity, as we can see here, it is set at 135. The normal conductivity machine is 135. We keep between till 145. Now, as per the sodium, we have to change the conductivity. And as you can see here, the ultrafiltrate volume we have kept on 1.8 liters, and it has been done till now. And ultrafiltrate time left is around 1 hour is left, and total goal is around 2.3 liters for the patient. So now this is a blood pump that is going on. Now this is the blood pump speed, that is 275 ml per minute. So and if you come here in this patient, as you can see, we have an AV fistula as the axis. So this red, as you can see here, this is the arterial line. So that is the blood is coming from the patient into the patient by the blood pump, and then it is getting returned via the blue line. So and this is the venous line.
Thank you very much, Dr. R.K. Yadav, for the nice demonstration. Now I'll take a few more questions which have come in. Dr. R.K. Yadav, if you could answer this, is there any new development in access for dialysis with respect to catheter size, as it is quite traumatic to put?
Good morning. First of all, thanks for invitation. Catheter size basically depends upon the blood flow rate. We have to achieve a minimum blood flow. So it is size is basically in French. So for pediatric patient, we use 11 French. For adults, we use 12.5 French. So there is no change in the size because we need more pumping.
Okay. Dr. Mishra, would you want to take this question forward, sir?
Gunjan, I think you only carry on.
Okay. Okay. So we go to the next question.
No, I'm coming. What is the question, Gunjan?
So the question is, what are the new developments in access of dialysis to the respect to catheter size? Is it quite, as it has been quite traumatic to put?
You can put a long-term catheter in a patient where access is not possible, like in subclavian, where you can do a surgical access, and the catheter, you have to go for like mini surgery. So like you put a HIC catheter, like HIC. The same way dialysis catheter, long-term catheter are there, which are medicated and which can stay for up to 6 months or longer. So that's another thing. It's not a, new development. It's an old development, but this is being done quite often when like you think that fistula, other things will be not possible. A patient is due for in near transplant. You don't want fistula fails. So rather than putting a frequent subclavian, jugular or femoral, this is one thing which can stay for longer time. I do not know anything more than that. If anything extra, let us know.
Sir. No, sir.
That's all. Thank you.
So next question again to Dr. R.K. Yadav. What is the mixture of part A and part B solutions? What is the purpose of this?
Basically, part A is acid and part B is the sodium bicarbonate. This is basically to maintain a electrolyte concentration equivalent to a normal blood.
Okay. So how do we adjust conductivity, sir, for hypo and hypernatremia? Is the next question.
Basically, in the machine we can adjust from
अरे नहीं फायर स्टेशन के सामने इधर मेम नगर
Mr. Sir, if you can mute, sir. Sir,
Yeah,
please
sorry.
mute.
हाँ sorry.
Yes, sir. R.K. Yadav, sir, please go ahead.
basically we can adjust from 135 to 145 conductivity. So we have to keep conductivity near to the patient sodium concentration. If patient in the hyponatremia, we have to keep down lower concentration to maintain a balance. If patient have sodium is around 130, so we have to keep around 135 conductivity. So it should be close to the patient sodium level to avoid large differences.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for this.
Dr. Gunjan, can I make a comment?
Sure, sir, sure.
Yeah, so the machine that was demonstrated just now, the Fresenius 4008, it has a sodium range of 128 to 148. So you can go down to 128 on that. And if you are using a B Brown dialog, you can go down to 120. There is even a Nipro machine which goes down to 110 and goes up to 170, which is actually very dangerous. So a narrow range of conductivity, but with allowing you some adjustment is the best. So I think the machines which go between 128 to about 155, that's the Alton machine, goes up to 160, are probably the best. As far as A and B part are concerned, why do you need to have them separate? It is because the A part contains calcium chloride, and calcium cannot be added to sodium bicarbonate. It will precipitate as calcium carbonate. So these are two separate concentrates which are mixed within the machine, just as with your CRRT bags, Prismasol BD, you have to break the seal on the bag before you hang it on the scale, because the sodium bicarbonate is kept separately from the calcium. So the same thing is done with the A and B concentrates.
Thank you, sir, for this. So the next question again to R.K. Yadav, sir, is please comment on the ultrafiltrate volume, UF rate, target fluid to be removed, also relation between sodium level and conductivity.
Basically, to provide a standard and effective dialysis, we need calculation of KT by V, and it should be 1.4. If a patient on twice weekly hemodialysis, it should be 1.4. And we should use high flux dialyzer, and duration of dialysis should be 4 hours. In a week, it should be 12 hours. And important is the blood flow. Blood flow rate should be more than 250 ml per minute. And then the dialysate flow, it should be between 450 to 600 ml per minute. So we have to provide a calculated targeted KT by V should be 1.4 per session. And for effective, it should be more than 1.2. So is there any other thing in question?
Can I add?
Yes, sir, Lobo, sir, please, if you could add.
Yeah. See, the question was on ultrafiltration rate, and it was very similar to the question that was asked on CRRT, which Rajiv mentioned, and Dr. Chacko also, that the target ultrafiltration will be dependent on how much overload the patient has, what is going to be the daily requirement of mandatory fluids. If you're giving TPN, then about 1.5 liter of TPN will go in. Blood products, if the patient requires them, infusions of pressors, etc. The total requirement of the fluid might be 2.5 to 3 liters. And if the patient is in pulmonary edema, then you'll have to remove the obligatory intake plus some additional fluid. The machine which was demonstrated, the 4008, you can set a maximum ultrafiltration time of 9 hours 59 minutes, about 10 hours. So you have to choose your target, and then you choose how much time you would do it in, and the machine will set the rate automatically. So you, as long as you don't exceed a particular rate which you deem to be safe, you set the ultrafiltration time accordingly. And the second part was, what is the relationship between conductivity and sodium? They are given by the Locatelli equation, that dialysate sodium is equal to 9.5 into conductivity plus 6.5. A basic rule of thumb is that the dialysate sodium will be approximately 10 times the displayed conductivity. So if your conductivity is 13, the sodium is around 130. If your conductivity is 14, the sodium will be 140 and so on.
Thank you, sir. So now the next question is, are these solutions A and B which are used, are they constant or you can actually individualize them for every patient? Lobo, sir, if you want to answer this.
Yeah. So most centers in India are using what is called as the Drake bicarbonate formula. That is, the machine has two stepper motors inside which draw in one part of solution A, that's the acid concentrate, 1.8 parts of solution B, and 34 parts of water, and mix them to give you the required concentrate. Now, he didn't have, for lack of time, he couldn't show you the dialysate menu on the machine. The first thing at the top of the menu is it shows you dilution ratio. Now you can set various dilution ratios depending on the concentrates you're using. So I mentioned the Drake bicarbonate formula. You get a Fresenius formula. You get a Belgian canister formula. Also, now you get sterile dry bicarbonate powders. So that is known as the bibag for the Fresenius and the bicart for the Gambro machines. You can also go into the dialysate menu and you can adjust the dialysate sodium, as Dr. Yadav mentioned earlier, and the dialysate bicarbonate. So the bicarbonate can be varied between 24 to 40, and the sodium, as I said, between 128 to 148 by adjusting the stepper motor speed in the dialysate menu.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Next question is to Dr. Balasubramaniam. So the question is, how do you calculate the dose of dialysis in the intermittent hemodialysis? Dr. Balasubramaniam? Sir, are you online?
Muted. He
Dr.
needs
Lobo?
to unmute. Dr. Balasubramaniam is muted. He needs to unmute.
So you can take that question, sir. Then if
Okay.
sir is...
How do you calculate the dose, I think, was the question.
Yes, sir.
So
How do you
what,
calculate the dose of intermittent?
so what is done in intermittent hemodialysis is, because it's intermittent, there will be a sawtoothing of the blood urea level. So we measure the blood urea before, we measure the blood urea after, and our target is a minimum of a 65% reduction in the urea, which corresponds to what somebody was saying is a KT by V, that is clearance into time divided by volume of distribution of 1.2. And there are software available. If you feed in the pre and post dialysis ureas, the ultrafiltration volume, and the patient's weight, it will calculate this constant for you, KT by V. But a target is reduce the blood urea by 65% in each session. If you are starting hemodialysis in a patient with a very high blood urea, you want to minimize dialysis disequilibrium, then you target about 35% reduction, 30 to 35% on the first session.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. My next question is to Dr. Nasa. Understanding all the vascular access methods that are there, the candidate wants to know what can you do to reduce the trauma that happens to the patient during access, during
Thank you,
taking the
Dr.
vascular.
Gunjan. I think this question is very pertinent to intensive care unit, because most of the time patients land up into urgent or requirement of dialysis where hemodialysis catheter need to be placed by an intensivist most of those times. So an ultrasound guided placement of a catheter is, I think, the foremost which we should maybe in a routine setting it may not be usually done by most of the nephrologists, but yes, in an intensive care unit it has to be only an ultrasound guided catheter. Appropriate catheter, like for a internal jugular, you need to pick up an internal jugular guided catheter, not the femoral one. So they are mostly, there are different catheter depending upon the size, and we as soon as the patient is stable, we go for tunneled catheters, which are again internal jugular catheters, but they are tunneled, so they are soft silicone catheters, reduces the risk of trauma, as I think Dr. Mishra also pointed out. They are again internal jugular, but they get tunneled through the subclavian route by giving us less chances of infection, and they are relatively silicone-based catheters, so that trauma is less, and they can be kept for longer duration without risking the further infection. So important thing is to use ultrasound. The second thing is to use the appropriate catheter.
Thank you, senior faculties, for answering these questions. We will understanding. Okay, there are a few more questions. I'll finish them first before we go ahead. So the question is to Dr. Lobo. Please comment on dialysis and perioperative requirement, that is just before surgery.
Yeah, so yeah, it might be that if you have a patient with hyperkalemia, metabolic acidosis, pulmonary edema, then you and the patient and the surgery is less urgent, then you might want a preoperative dialysis to stabilize the patient. Of course, if the patient is going for an urgent surgery, then we would not like to use anticoagulation in such a situation. If it is a situation of post-operative, a patient has just returned from, say, extensive abdominal surgery for abdominal sepsis, peritonitis, and so on, again, we would like to minimize anticoagulation. We have options today if we are doing CRRT of using regional citrate anticoagulation, which I'm sure will be covered. The greatest advantage perhaps of SLED today is that SLED and intermittent hemodialysis can, this is the experience all over the world, and there are published literature on this from Suhail Ahmed, Washington School of Medicine, and Victoria Kumar, University of California, Davis, that SLED can be done without anticoagulation. And today we have an acid concentrate for SLED, which is citrate based. So that adds a small degree of anticoagulation to the dialysate itself. And we do for the last 6-7 years, it's citrate based dialysate that we use for SLED. We don't require anticoagulation. So one of the things about perioperative is avoidance of anticoagulation. If it's a vascular surgery, very much avoid vascular surgery, neurosurgery. We would want to avoid fluctuations in blood pressure, fluctuations in intracranial pressure. And there are studies to show that you can do SLED in a way that you avoid intracranial pressure fluctuations. You can adjust the sodium for neurosurgery patients, keep it at a higher level, as was already mentioned. So there are some adjustments which would have to be tailored for the perioperative patient.
Thank you, sir. Next question I will put it to Dr. Rajesh Mishra because he is the new president-elect. And the question is that most of the time it has been seen that the dialysis technicians are busy and this tends to delay the dialysis in the critical care scenario. So do you think that in critical care training, do you think critical care training should include training for using intermittent dialysis machines also?
Not intermittent, but SLED, yes, SLED and CRRT. Because time is coming when DM course is coming. We should not be, we are a kind of people who cannot be dependent on anyone for doing emergencies. Definitely not surgery, for any medical thing. So when we can put catheter, now machine, most of the machines are coming with artificial intelligence in coming time. And they will direct you how to put the system, how to put the circuit there, how to connect it, and you can easily do it. It will not be a job which only technician can do. But definitely it is required that in coming time, we should be trained enough that we should not be dependent on technician to start dialysis. We should in fact train our nurses to do this job. And this we have to achieve it to get better results. We cannot depend till morning for anyone to come and then start dialysis. Thank you.
So we go ahead with our session, understanding the basics of RRT, renal replacement therapy. We now have a panel discussion, which will be on initiation of renal replacement therapy in ICU. To moderate this panel, we have none other than Dr. Kanwarpreet Sodhi, who is an expert in critical care nephrology and is the director and head of Department of Critical Care at Deep Hospital, Ludhiana. So we take it ahead from here.
Hello friends, we all know that half of our ICU patients, they develop acute kidney injury at any point of time during the ICU stay. And renal replacement therapy is being increasingly utilized to support the critically ill patients with severe AKI. And approximately 2/3 of patients with AKI go on to require RRT during any point of time during the stay in the ICU. And in the present RRT workshop being conducted by ICCM Criticare, we're going to have a discussion with our esteemed panelists who will be briefly touching the different practical aspects of AKI, like how to define AKI, how to investigate, and the RRT, including the timing of initiation of RRT, the mode selection, and when to stop RRT. So to carry on the discussion, we have on a panel the learned national and international faculty who will be sharing their knowledge on this platform. And let me introduce my distinguished panelists, Dr. Pradeep Rangappa. He needs, I think, no introduction at all. May I have Dr. Pradeep Rangappa on the screen, please, Manas?